Hello, and welcome to the show. Welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I'm thrilled you're joining me today. In this show, we explore how to live your exciting, creative, and most fulfilling life. Hello, and welcome to the show. Welcome to the Creative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm also thrilled to have my guest today. Meg Rentschler is a professional certified coach who helps executives and leaders function in a way that promotes the health and well-being of themselves, their teams, and their companies while increasing productive communication and strengthening relationships. She also works as a coach educator in 2 coach certification programs and mentors other coaches to grow and strengthen their coaching skills and businesses. How fabulous is that? Meg received her BA at Michigan State University and her master's in social work from my alma mater, the University of Michigan. I can't wait to talk about Ann Arbor with her a little bit. She spent decades working as a psychotherapist and helped people make positive changes in their lives. She is also the host of the Star Coach Show podcast. She now lives and works in Dallas. I'm thrilled to welcome Meg to the Creative Mindset Podcast. Welcome, Meg. I'm excited to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
First, let's talk about our shared history at the University of Michigan. Are you originally a Michigander?
I am born and raised. I grew up in a large, gregarious Irish Catholic family just north of Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we went to school at the University of Michigan. And I'm one of 9, and half of the family is still in Michigan, including my mom. We lost my dad a couple of years ago, and I make back to the Great Lakes state when I can.
Wow, one of 9. So you come by your coaching skills honestly. You must have been herding a lot of cats as you were growing up.
Well, what's interesting is that my place in the birth order is right after one of my brothers died. So I am number 8 out of the 9, and there is something interesting about sort of the role that I took on in the family. I think, subconsciously, being the firstborn after an infant died of sudden infant death syndrome, it creates an interesting role that I ended up playing in the family.
What do you mean by interesting? If you don't mind talking about it, how?
No, I don't mind talking about it. It's very, and it's one of those things that, now I might weird out some of your listeners, but what is very interesting to me is many years ago, or not many, I mean like maybe 20 years ago, I got a call from my mom. She was in Michigan, I was in Dallas, and she said, I went to see a psychic today, which, it was so sort of out of the realm of what I would expect from my mother. Nothing again. I mean, I was just sort of taken aback, this sort of staunch Catholic. And she said, she talked to me about you. Please call. So obviously, that's one of those things you're going to pick up the phone and call your mom back. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. She said, well, I was talking with her, and she said, I'm here. A young man is with me. He says his name is Kevin, and that he is your son. And she said, yes, Kevin died when he was 7 months old. And she said, he wants you to thank Margaret. Who's Margaret? And she said, well, Margaret is another one of my daughters. And he said, well, Margaret chose to come to your family to take away the pain. And he wants you to thank Margaret for coming to the family. And my mom said it just resonated with her so clearly, because my entire life I was really in that place of, even as one of the youngest in the family, being the joker when I needed to be the joker, being the caretaker when I needed to be the caretaker, very much being tuned into people's emotions and what was going on. She said, you were born with a smile on your face and it never went away. So, which I said, Mom, from where you were, you didn't know what I was born with. You couldn't see what I was born with a smile on my face. She said, well, as soon as I could see you. But anyway, so that's sort of the role that I've played in my family without realizing it.
And it's interesting that you say that. It might weird out my listeners, by the way. It will not weird out my listeners at all, because there is no way to know what actually is out there. So if the psychic said something, right, and if the psychic was picking up on some energy, that's, hey, if it's a positive thing, especially, let's take it and run with it. So,
and what's very interesting, and I'm sorry, yeah, I just have to, this completes the story, that then a couple years later, I was in Michigan and I said, let's make an appointment. I'm going to make an appointment with the same lady. And I went to see her. And she said, I am with a young man who's your brother. I mean, she had no way of connecting me. This was years different. And he wants to thank you for choosing to go to your family to take away the pain. So there was when you make an appointment with this person, you just give them your first name and your telephone number. My telephone number was different. I mean, besides the fact that it was years apart. So it was just very validating to me that this was definitely a choice that I had made before coming into the world.
And it sounds like you've taken that choice and really grown your whole life with it, not only with your siblings and your mom, and the way you've lived since then seems to be the same exact kind of, it's sort of taking your life into your work. Is that the case, do you think? I know that you were originally a psychotherapist. Is that what drew you to psychotherapy work?
Yeah, what's interesting is, and now mind you, I had made all those choices before ever knowing any of this, but I read an article as a young teen. I don't know if you remember, but the Detroit Free Press used to have a Sunday magazine in it. I don't remember the name of it, but it would have articles, and it would come within the Detroit Free Press on Sundays. And it was about runaways. It was about teens that were runaways that had just gotten themselves into horrible situations. And I decided right then, I'm gonna work with troubled kids. And then I went to U of M and got my master's of social work and spent the next 20 plus years working with teens. I started in inner Detroit, working with children in community mental health. And then when we moved to Texas, I continued my work with you. And then my practice just evolved where I was working with families and couples. But yeah, I think it just was a natural, fluid process for me.
That's amazing. I love that it's an evolutionary process you're describing. That's terrific. And by the way, that was Parade magazine. I remember that.
Thank you. Yes, it was. Yeah. I love talking to a fellow Michigander.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I might have read that exact article when I was a kid, because we got the Detroit Free Press, and I remember devouring the Parade magazine every Sunday. That's very funny. So I do want to ask you, within the work that you were doing especially with troubled kids, how did you decide to focus and move into executive coaching? Because that seems like it's more what you do now. And what drew you to that? How did you evolve from the work you had been doing, especially as a psychotherapist, into executive coaching?
Which is such a great word that you're using, evolve, because that's really what it was. Over the years, 20 plus years of being a psychotherapist, and the majority of that was in private practice, what sort of began to evolve in my practice is that when you're working with children and adolescents, you end up working a lot with their parents. And it just became an evolution for me after probably, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years. I started transitioning from seeing children. It just felt natural that at that point, working with adults and helping adults be healthier and being able to help them be sort of the foundation of the family and approaching that from a healthy standpoint just became a transition and an evolution for me. So then I started for the next 10, 12 years of my practice, really doing a lot of couples therapy, working with couples to be stronger for their children, family therapy, but also working with adults in helping them adjust to whatever was going on in their lives. And I started seeing so many people coming to therapy that were struggling in their work situations, that they were working in environments that were just not healthy in corporate America or organizations. And I started feeling like I was being very reactive to a broken system rather than proactive by trying to kind of help hold people together or help them make choices to respond to work environments that were not healthy in sort of human dynamics. So I thought, what can I do differently? And that's when I spent a couple of years kind of researching what could I do either to transition my therapy practice to, or ultimately what ended up happening was, what do I learn about and do differently, which is executive coaching. I thought if I can go into workplaces, help people communicate better, help leaders lead in a way that brings out the strengths of their teams, to help leaders tap into their own strengths and their own ability to communicate more effectively, then hopefully there will not be as many stressed out people because of work environments. So that's actually what led to that evolution.
So it sounds to me like you went from helping people manage their personal lives into helping people manage their professional lives, and that becomes sort of a solution to then helping them manage their personal lives. Does that sound like a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a nice summary.
Wow, that's fabulous. I love it. So let me ask you a question. When you were making that transition, did you find that there were a lot of similarities in working with therapy patients versus coaching clients, or were there a bunch of differences in the way you had to work with each type of person?
No, that's such a good question, because I think that as a whole, foundationally, whether you're working with a therapy client or a coaching client, it comes from mindset from the professional that's working. So in my mind, and really one of the underlying principles of coaching is that people as a whole, are whole, resourceful, and creative. And that's just a fact. Whether it's somebody as a therapy client or a coaching client, deep down, we are whole, resourceful, and creative. Now, it's the stories that we tell ourselves that either work for us or against us. And obviously in therapy, we also have, some mental health issues going on. But even beneath that, I believe that people are whole, resourceful, and creative. So in therapy, you're dealing perhaps with more historical issues, some root cause of problems or potential dysfunction, and you're helping people begin to put the pieces back together. Coaching tends to be more present to future oriented and looking at what do we want different moving forward. Yet, I will tell you that as a solution-focused therapist, I was also helping clients look at, okay, this is what's not working. What do we want to be different going forward? Sometimes you really do have to go into the past and look at where some of those issues arose. What are some of the patterns that are occurring for your client that you might need to help them understand the origins of that and how they want to look at that differently. But ultimately, I think that there's, in many ways, more similarities than differences. Now, with that being said, in therapy, you certainly have clients who that are at different levels. There are certainly clients that I saw as therapy clients that had the same kinds of issues that my coaching clients do. And then I also had therapy clients who were suicidal or struggled with psychosis or struggled with some very intense mental health issues.
And you probably, as a coach, don't address those with your executive coaching clients. Is that true? Or do you refer them to therapists? You must have a huge database where you go, well, I think this person would probably be able to help you. How do you address those kinds of things when you find that someone has an issue that in your coaching practice with this solution-driven approach that you may not be the ideal person to help them?
You're spot on. So what will happen in that situation is if I'm working with a coaching client that really would be more appropriate, that some of those issues need to be dealt with through a therapist, I'm going to discuss the difference and really from the get-go, part of the responsibility in setting up a coaching relationship is that the client understands, what's coaching, what's consulting, what's therapy, what's mentoring, so that if in fact we've got issues that are arising that are better dealt with through a therapist, I will definitely talk to the client about that and work very diligently to link them up with somebody who would be a good match for them, because all these things that we do are relationship driven. Therefore, it's important that we help people connect with somebody who is a good relationship fit for them.
It's all relationship oriented, it sounds like. And with being solution driven in your work, you probably have to think pretty creatively to engage with your executive clients, especially, not just what's the appropriate resource, but how do you customize these things? How do you customize your programming to fit their needs, your ideas to fit their needs? What do you do to make it so singular and personal to each of your clients?
Every engagement begins with a needs assessment in a way. I mean, it begins in that exploration of what is it that we are working toward that's important for you. So it's not unusual for me to start an engagement in, if we're working together over this next 6 months, what are you going to want to have different for yourself? What are you going to want to be experiencing differently in your personal and professional life 6 months from now that will have made your work and your energy and your investment in coaching worth your while? Now that's whether I'm working with an organization, let's say with the whole leadership team. What does the organization want to be different? And what does each leader want to experience? It's like being very intentional about not walking in with any assumptions and being very intentional about, okay, organization, this is your goals and what are the client's individual goals and how can we look at how those match or where any discrepancies are and what we're going to do to create a win-win on both sides.
So can you give me any examples on what some of these executives that you work with might be trying to achieve in their companies?
Oh, absolutely. So if a company is asking for the whole leadership team to have coaching and maybe some group coaching or team coaching along with that, many times it is maybe there is a new leader coming in, and so they want to create alignment around what the vision for the company is, what the goal is, and how each of those leaders feeds into creating that trickle down, because there's such a ripple effect in coaching. When a leader begins to think differently and do things differently, then it's going to impact their team. And how do we get everybody on the same page, kind of looking towards those same goals? When I work with organizations, whether it's a manufacturing that are, let's say, making airplanes. I've worked with companies that make airplanes, that we're all wanting that airplane to come out safe and whole, and so that the customers are able to fly it safely and get where they need to go and choose that product over another product. Yet there are so many different facets that go into that, whether it's sales and the engineers and the line workers, and how do we get everybody to kind of see the same vision and move in the same direction? We also, many times, if I'm working just with an individual leader, it might be over issues of, how am I communicating effectively or not communicating effectively? How am I allowing the story that I'm telling myself, my self-talk, my own beliefs to get in the way and sabotage my confidence or my ability to connect with others or to present in a way that people are able to believe in the vision that we're creating for the company.
And by vision, do you mean following the mission statement, or is there something more far-reaching that you're looking for?
I think it can be both, the mission statement, but also what are really our values? How do we tie our values into what that mission is? What is the overall? Sometimes the vision can be smaller than the huge vision, the huge mission statement. And how do we, as the engineering team, how do we see things? How do we create our piece of the pie in a way that we are proud of and motivated to do, and how we all see that each piece that we bring is a valuable part of that bigger vision, that bigger mission?
How do you help them do that? What are some of the ways you might help a team do that exploration? Do you have any specific exercises or activities you do with them?
I think a lot of coaching as a whole is a process of both supporting and challenging the client through inquiry, through helping them determine what's within them, what is their own wisdom, what is their own creativity, and how might that be tapped down. So when we get truly curious about what is important to you in this, and how does your overall value system or your belief in yourself, how does that either feed into this or many times subtract from that? And what do we need to clear out of the way? What do we need to be able to explore and help you connect with your coworkers or your leadership to be able to communicate what's important to you? So with that, there might be assessments that we use. I use emotional intelligence assessments and personality assessments and 360 assessments where we get feedback from people above and next to and below to give the client a better understanding of how am I being interpreted by others? What's others' perceptions of me? And what's interesting about perception is that whether the leader agrees that that's what they're trying to do or the way that they are meaning to be interpreted, the way that people perceive us is reality for them. So how do we begin to use the information we get from others to make some decisions about how we want to show up every day in the workplace?
That sounds fascinating. Wow.
I hope you can tell I'm very passionate. I just I'm such a believer in the process that coaching brings forward and the energy that it creates. I just interviewed a master coach the other day, and she said, as coaches, we have the capability to catalyze the world to greater well-being. And I very much believe that. It's in believing that if we stay in that place of curiosity and help people reach what they truly, I'll give them permission to tap into their own creativity and their belief in what is my self-determined change that I want to make, and how do I take feedback and help really be the best person that I can be because I've got somebody willing to partner with me, to challenge me, to support me, and help me get there.
And when you do that, I imagine that there's an array, sort of a continuum of people who need some aid and then some people who need a great deal of aid. I know that you work as a critical incident responder, and I'd love to talk about that. When you go from something that seems more forward thinking as opposed to crisis management, how do you make that pivot? And what do you do as a critical incident responder?
Great question. And I would say that falls more under the umbrella of my therapist hat on. So as a critical incident responder, you are responding to horrendous things that happen on site. And when I say horrendous things, they could be anything from a robbery to a death on site to a horrible industrial accident that is impacting the work environment and the people within that environment. So what you do as a critical incident responder is you go in and you help whoever the affected people are process through that incident in such a way that, and there's sort of a scientific proven way to walk them through the incident, to help walk them through the thought process that occurred when that tragedy happened, the emotive responses that occurred, and you do it as a group so that it becomes that energy around how can we help support one another and break isolation. Because when we go through trauma, we might feel very isolated from one another. And when you get people together to talk about what the incident, how it impacted them, where they were when they first learned of the incident. And you'll see that everybody is very, very different. Somebody might have been right next to the person who was injured, and somebody else might have been in the lunchroom and heard about it through the grapevine. Yet everyone is impacted because it is a part of their work environment. And I'll say to them, I know that you many times spend more time with your colleagues during a given week than you do with your family members. We become connected to the people that we work with and connected to the environment that we work within. So when something tragic happens in our environment, we are impacted at a very deep level, and we can feel isolated in our emotions unless we are kind of brought together and given permission to walk through it and talk about it, and never made to talk about it. So one of the sort of founding rules of that from the get-go is I'll say, you completely have permission to share or not share. I just ask that you stay in the room while we are walking through this process, because just your physical presence can be very helpful to others. And I believe that others' physical presence will be helpful to you. Now, I will say I've done critical incident debriefing for over 20 years, and rarely, I can probably count on my two hands, times that people have chosen not to share in the debrief together.
And it's interesting to me because it seems like just making the choice to speak or not to speak feels like it's taking back a little bit of power for their own self-determination after trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's wonderful that you show that sensitivity to the people who have undergone this traumatic event, whatever it was, that, you know what, you have some power here. You have some autonomy here. You get to decide how much you want to share or don't share. But I would love it if you would share, if you have any favorite stories about that work or a poignant moment in your work as a critical incident responder. I would love to hear a story about that if you have one.
A couple come to mind in sort of two different veins. First of all, I do a lot of bank robberies. There's probably more bank robberies than people who are not in this line of work realize. And so I think that one of the things that I find to be very powerful in doing debriefings after a robbery is moving the group from when we go through trauma. It is not unusual to get caught in an endless stream of what ifs. The negative what ifs are very fertile, and there's kind of no end to them, yet they keep us from being able to recover because we can get pulled into just that. Well, what if he had shot me? What if my children were without a mother or without a father? What if he was, or he or she, but the vast majority of bank robbers just tend to be male. What if he knows where I live? What if? So being able to kind of stop the what ifs and share the experience of resiliency is about sort of dealing with what did happen and how can we then move forward from that. So being able to see a group move from spiraling in that panic of what ifs and the fear that sort of can grip them into being realistic. Yes, you work in a business where money is your business, so there is a higher probability of things like robberies happening in, let's say, in a banking institution. However, let's deal with what really did happen. Okay, he came in, he gave a note, I emptied my drawer, he left. It happened in 30 seconds. Yes, that's traumatic. Yes, that changes our whole view of work for a while. Now, what can we all do together to talk about what we need moving forward? So pulling people from a place of panic and overwhelm and spiraling in what ifs to looking at what really is and how can we move forward can be very, very powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It sounds like there's a sort of a stepping back and observing it feeling around this, sort of being more factual about it rather than in the stew of it. And I think that I think you're again helping people come back to their own power. And as a coach, it sounds like you do that quite a bit for the people you work with and for the other coaches that you talk with on your show. And I'd love to talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
I would love to. I love talking about my show. Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, that's great. So the podcast, the Star Coach Show, I'd love to know what made you decide to start it to begin with.
Well, I decided to, I started it a couple of years ago, but I had thought about it a couple of years even before that. So I'm nothing if not like slow. What was happening was I have been a coach instructor now for about 11 years. And what I was noticing is that I was getting, so coaches come into a coach certification program and they learn what coaching is versus all these other things that they thought coaching was. And they begin to work towards maybe developing their own businesses or those kinds of things. And I was hearing the same issues come up over and over again. Okay, now we're through the certification program, but who could I talk to who's an experienced coach, or who could I talk to who could help me understand how I now take this skill set and continue to build and grow in my skills, or how do I build my business? All these questions, I thought, well, I've got to figure out a way to kind of bring an additional resource and be helpful to the coaching community. And that was the impetus for me beginning the Star Coach Show. And the Star Coach Show is actually an acronym. So it's strategies, tools, and resources for coaches. That's what the STAR part stands for. And I thought I have all these resources. I'm connected to all these coaches. Let me each week bring some new resource, strategy, tool that coaches can apply immediately to their either strengthening their skill or building their business. And that was sort of the foundation.
So who do you have typically as guests if you're trying to do these strategies, tools, and resources? Who are the people you bring on the show?
I either bring successful coaches on in different niches. So I might have coaches talking about relationship coaching or career coaching or executive coaching. So giving sort of a glimpse into the world of what does it take to be a successful coach in this particular realm. Or we talk about skills. So there's 3 levels of coaches in the International Coach Federation. There's sort of the new coach, which would be an ACC coach, an associate certified coach. There's professional certified coaches who have sort of that mid-range. And then there's a small percentage of coaches who have decided to go forward and become a master certified coach, which is one of those things that's on my to-do list. But I will have master certified coaches come on and talk about ways to coach masterfully. So, and in addition, I'll have people talk about building websites or doing launches or all the different things that coaches might want to do.
Okay, I have to know who, if you want to share, has been your most interesting or surprising guest? Who has blown your mind?
You know, I have to tell you, I love my guests. I have every single week, it's like my favorite guest is on. Now, I will say that I had all sorts of fun. I met a coach also from Michigan who is a magician and a coach, and he uses the concepts and the principles of magic to help create messages for his clients. He was so much fun to spend time with. Like, for example, when he gives a keynote, he might stand there and rip up a newspaper in front of the audience while he's talking. He's just talking and ripping up the newspaper. And while he's talking about how fragmented the company can become and how, it's everybody is sort of doing their own thing and the sort of the cost of that. And then he'll begin talking about how they need to come together. And lo and behold, the newspaper, he'll open it up and it will be whole again. That kind of, and just the energy talking to him about what magic is all, sort of the principles of magic and what abracadabra means and how he applies that to his coaching. That was a fun interview. I really enjoyed meeting Andrew.
That sounds wonderful. My husband, I don't know if you know this about me, probably not, or about my husband. He's a clown, variety entertainer. Yeah. So he was a clown in the circus. And when he does his presentations, he does it from that clowning perspective. And when I do coaching, and do my workshops, for example, I do it from singing. So I use principles of singing and singing as an individual, singing in a choir. It sounds very similar to what your magician guest did, that you can use these principles from other creative endeavors and focus their aspects to help people make progress in their own lives. So I think it's fabulous that you chose that as the answer. I'm like, yay, that makes me so happy, because I think that kind of creativity being brought into the rest of our lives and being applied that way can just make the magic happen. Sorry for the pun, but it is.
Absolutely. And isn't that just the way that things happen? I mean, the example out of the hundreds of guests that I've had, the example that I picked was one that just sung to you. So
absolutely. Oh, there you go, to keep it going. So let me ask you a question. When you're doing this, when you're preparing for your podcast, when you're preparing for presentations or programs that you're doing, what do you do to research? Do you research the people, the company, the resources? What kind of preparation do you do before you go into one of these activities?
It's interesting because first of all, like if I'm doing a presentation, I have a few key areas that I am invested in talking about, passionate about talking about. I will tweak that depending upon the organization that I'm talking with. But as a whole, those are sort of my signature talks. And So they might be about belief systems and the barriers that we create for ourselves through the self-talk that we do, or leadership and women in leadership, and the power of using coaching as a leadership style. Those are just sort of, so if somebody were to approach me about doing a talk outside of what one of my signature talks is, I would have to really talk about whether or not that is something that is the best use of my talent and what they need and those kinds of things. Now, when I'm getting people on my show or talking to guests on my show, what I will primarily do at this point, I usually only take people who are referrals from other trusted sources, and I will do a pre-interview with them and just say, let's talk about what you are absolutely passionate about. Because if we can identify what you're passionate about, and we can talk about how that relates to coaching, because it's usually I'm talking to somebody who's somewhere in the field of coaching, then I believe that their passion is going to bring absolute value to my audience. And we will come up with the focus of the interview, what's important to them. And then I do my interviews much like I do my coaching conversations, which is I stay curious. We start in a particular place, and then I just ask what comes up for me as in what I'm curious about and what I believe my audience wants to know. And every single one of my interviews is more like a coaching conversation.
That's wonderful. It sounds like a lot of fun. And also you have to think on your feet at the same time.
Well, and I have to have a guest who's open to doing that too, because we're just dancing in the moment. We are just kind of going. Now, I'm not going to ask something that is completely away from whatever we agreed that we were going to talk about, but I'm just in that place of, wow, tell me more about that, because I know that my listener ears perked up just now when they heard you say X, Y, and Z. So what is it about that we can do a deeper dive into?
And what is the most exciting aspect of that, of any of your work? Because it sounds like you're pretty passionate about all of the different strands.
Yeah. So I am. I mean, you're spot on with that. I'm just, I think that what is just energizing and exciting about that is that when I can connect people with other people, I mean, the connection is just a huge, important, it's actually one of my, tops. It is my top strength is the ability to connect others, and the belief in that we all have something to sort of share, and that we can help others or aid others in sort of being stronger through whatever our gifts are that we can share. So when I'm in that platform, whether it's helping a coaching client tap into their own greatness, or being on the show with somebody who is sharing their wisdom and their greatness, and I know that there's listeners who are like, that is exactly what I needed to hear today, that is over the top exciting for me.
I love when that happens too. It's so phenomenal especially when you get that feedback, right? When someone says, you have no idea who I am, but I needed to tell you that what you said today was exactly what I needed
to hear. Yes, that is the best. Yes.
When they don't do that, when they come back with more questions for resources and ideas, what are your favorites to give them? Do you have any go-to resources for example, for executives who might want to coach, or websites or books that you could recommend to people who go, oh, now I want to know more?
Yeah. So, so many different, because, there's, and, my poor bookcase is just like, whoa. My husband's like, seriously, another book from Amazon, because I am constantly, getting new books and reading books all the time. I would say that some of my favorite resources, just in thinking about, like, how do let's say I'm an executive and I'm considering using coaching as my leadership style. the book, Coaching as a Leadership Style by Dr. Robert Hicks, I think is spot on in helping people see, oh, this is how I could apply coaching and staying curious. Also, the coaching habit, which is a much easier read. Dr. Hicks is a psychologist. He gets really into sort of all the nitty gritty of it all, which I'm a bit of a research junkie and I love all that. But, if I was just a leader, or if I'm talking to a leader about potentially using coaching as a leadership style, I might send them the coaching habit. Talking about staying curious versus falling into judgment. This is just huge, period. Regardless of whether somebody's being coached or not. There's a book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life, which I find to be incredibly powerful. And I love the Harvard Business Review. I love the articles that they do. And, just spending time kind of looking through the different angles that they address through the Harvard Business Review is an incredible resource for the leaders that I work with.
I love the Harvard Business Review. I'm a
Yes.
junkie for them too. And they have some incredible, and their perspective is multifaceted, which I think is phenomenal, that you can look at it from lots of different ways, and they always lead you to think and evolve in your thinking.
Right.
And as coaches, when you talk to coaches and you think about the evolution of the coaching industry, what do you think about that? Things like the Harvard Business Review talk about that, the evolution. I know Fast Company talks about it too.
Right.
The evolution of various industries and where they're going to be going in the next few years. Do you and the coaches that you work with ever discuss where you see the industry going? And if so, what do you think? Where will coaching be 10 years from now?
Yeah, such a good question. And definitely that has been touched on in I don't know how many of my interviews. But, when we kind of think about the evolution of coaching, that first of all, it sort of was in this place of people not really knowing. So even, 11 years ago when I transitioned from therapy into coaching, it was, what's coaching? What's that? What team do you coach? And so I will say that I think the value of executive coaching, organizations understanding what partnering with a thought partner and a trusted advisor can kind of do for their leaders, particularly because the higher you get up in leadership, the less people you can really honestly talk to, because you are kind of giving that persona. You're the leader. You have to kind of have it together and know what you're talking about. So I think that coaching, first of all, transitioned from people not knowing what is coaching to, I think it's becoming more mainstream, certainly not there yet, but more mainstream. Now you think about the fact that the coaching industry really sort of became formalized in 1995. That's like a minute ago compared to, let's say, the therapy or consulting that were, started in the 1800s. So, definitely it's in its infancy. I see it moving from just being you get a coach because you're in trouble to you get a coach because you are a high potential, or you can be that much more. You can go further, faster, and more focused with more clarity if you have a coach than if you're just on your own. And I think that the coaching industry will continue to evolve and be worked within not just organizations. I mean, there's, relationship coaches and life coaching and whatever that means to different people, because I think life coaching is a very misunderstood sort of title. What exactly is a life coach? And there can be as many different kinds of life coaches as there are questions, I think. But being able to become more, I think it's going to become more important to have a credential, to have the training, to not, because right now you can really just kind of hang up a shingle and say you're a coach, whether you've received any coach training or coach certification. And my belief is that might begin to change. it's sort of like I couldn't say I'm a therapist without being licensed as a therapist. And I think that took a while to evolve, and the coaching industry will continue to kind of evolve, and yet hopefully just be focused on how can we help the world get to a greater well-being.
And it seems like that idea of wanting to help is central to you, to how you live your life. That's so wonderful to hear. When you do live your life, when you have your routines, do you have anything that you do to do that on a daily basis to help yourself stay in that mindset of wanting to help?
I think it comes down to gratitude, keeping a gratitude journal. I'm just a huge believer that gratitude is what grounds us in so many just in perspective. I think that having been a therapist for so long and seeing what people have survived and what obstacles people have overcome has helped me be very grateful for what's in my life, and helping others kind of ground in a place of gratitude. I like doing morning papers, which is an exercise that comes out of, what is the name of that book?
The Artist's Way by
Yes, that's
Julia Cameron.
it. Yes, that's it. I love doing morning papers and just doing that free flow writing each morning. I love walking and thinking and meditating. So all those things are things that I think keep me grounded in being available to others. Because if we don't fill our own well, then we run dry pretty quickly.
Absolutely. I talk about filling the well a lot with my clients. I also talk about cracked cups. And if you're trying to pour yourself into a cracked cup, you will never fill the cup. So you have to be sure that it's focused on something that's whole and positive, rather than something that's going to just push you down into a really into a cracked rabbit hole, if you will.
Exactly.
So I love that you meditate. Do you have a specific meditation practice? And if so, can you describe it?
I'm not as good at it as I'd like to be. So what and that's one of my consistent, I'm going to get better at meditating. So what I'll do is listen to meditations, but I'm not as good. I'm better at my morning papers. I'm better at my walking. And I love, and when I meditate, sometimes some of my meditations are walking meditations. So I'm able to listen and just sort of as a funny to that, I was very good at doing that. And then my son brought a puppy home from college, and then he had to go back to college without his puppy because he's not allowed to have a puppy. So now my walks have become struggling with this beast who wants to go in his own direction. So it's sort of messed with my walking meditations. But I'm still getting out there daily and walking the puppy. It's just because this puppy has now become 60 pounds of lean, mean muscle. He's just adorable, but he is definitely messing with my routine. So, that is something that, in complete transparency, I've got to get back into the routine of and better with my meditation.
And you know what? It's a process. So
right.
Where, I love what Pema Chodron says. She says, start where you are. And every day with meditation, I start where I am, because I think everybody, perhaps except the Dalai Lama, we all feel like we could probably do better at it than we're doing. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So let me ask you, what are you most curious about right now? Are you learning anything, studying anything that you can share?
I am actually in a place of my passion right now, or my focus has become in building different pieces of my own business. So I think being able to look at how do I increase my reach by offering content that helps other people increase their reach. And so that's going to be in some online programs. It's going to be, I'm rebuilding my membership site. So I'm doing a lot of things right now that are taking a lot of my energy and focus, but I'm really passionate about them, and I'm excited about sort of taking what's been started with the show and just increasing the instruction that I do to continue to offer ways for coaches to strengthen and leaders to become true to who they want to be as leaders.
Is that a guiding principle for you right now? That idea of through helping others, you then help yourself?
I would say that it is. I think that my guiding principle that kind of is even more foundational than that to me is that when I can help people understand that the difficulties that we bump into are in the way that we think about things, rather than that, yes, bad things happen and difficulties happen and challenges happen, but so much has to do with our mindset. So that whole concept of, well, how are we looking at it? What's the perspective we're taking, and how can we potentially shift that? But going back to your point, yes. So then how can I help other people tap into that and open up possibilities for themselves for that? So you know what? You're actually spot on. And that does tend to be just an underlying principle for me.
It certainly sounds like it, having talked to you for the last hour, that's exactly what it is. That it's, you have a real generosity of spirit, which I really appreciate. And having said that, because you are generous with so much wonderful content, I would love it if you would share how people can find you, your website, your social media, the different accounts, everything. I'd love to be able to put that in the show notes page. But if you can detail some of that here, then people can hear it as well as see it.
Oh, awesome. So I have two different websites. StarCoachShow.com is how you can learn all about the podcast, get resources, and that's actually being rebuilt right now, but it's still open as is. So StarCoachShow.com. My Twitter feed is @StarCoachShow. I have Facebook pages on both Star Coach Show and a Focus on Results Coaching, which is my executive coaching business. So I have a website, focusonresults.com. That is one of my Facebook pages, along with my LinkedIn would be Meg Rentschler. I actually have, and I don't know that the listeners, whether they, but I have a Star Coach Show and a Focus on Results in LinkedIn, but I am just bad about just being, all my followers, all my connections are through Meg Rentschler, and that's just kind of where I keep it. So that is how people find me. I'm not difficult, but with the last name Rentschler, there's not a lot of us. So it's one of those things that people don't necessarily know how to spell, but once you find me, there's not a whole lot of Rentschlers.
And in fact, let's spell it RENTSCHLER. That way, if people want to find you on LinkedIn and connect with you, then they'll be able to find it much easier. I know my name is spelled a little strangely, so I often have to go, okay, there's an H in there that shouldn't be.
Exactly.
So I would love it if you would, because I'm going to put all of this in the show notes, but do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share?
I think that as we wrap up, and I so appreciate being able to spend time with you. It's been so much fun. But I would just encourage people as a whole to think about the stories that you're telling yourself. And if you don't like the plot that you're in, or if you don't like the way that the story is playing out, maybe look at what are the things that I'm thinking that have led me to the place that I'm in. And if it's not conducive to where I want to be, how can I potentially change the message that I'm giving myself, or the thing that I'm telling myself, to something that increases my energy, increases my drive, my possibilities? Because the stories we tell ourselves are all fiction. We have a choice to to fill that line with something that works better for us, and then to follow through with the behaviors and the emotions that support that.
I love that. What story am I telling myself, and how can I change it to make my life better? That's so terrific. Wonderful. Meg, I can't thank you enough for being a guest on the Creative Mindset podcast. And I really hope that you have incredible continued success with both Star Coach Show and your executive coaching. You're doing such amazing work in the world to help people heal from trauma and also to make such progress in their lives. You're a blessing. Thank you so much, Meg. And I appreciate you being on the show.
I appreciate being able to be here with you. And thank you so much for all that you do in the world.
Oh, you're very sweet. Thank you. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode of the Creative Mindset podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg. If you have questions about today's show, please get in touch. The social media and all of the other resources that Meg mentioned will be on the show notes page at isoldet.com/blog. You can find it there. I'll be back next week with more information, more ideas, and more exciting content all about how to get into that beginner's creative mind. Until next time, I send you all of my love. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and please tell your friends about the community we're building here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright Isolde Trachtenberg 2019. Today's music was from Kevin MacLeod, Laser Groove, and Ave Marimba, brought to you by Creative Commons License 3.0. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, I send you all of my love.